Thank you for tuning in to RTM Nation Online, where we believe that you will receive the abundance of peace, prosperity, security, stability, health, healing, and truth. If you would like to learn more about the ministry, click the link below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now let's get into the message.
Family, we're still on the series Victory Lap, and today's message, I'm going to talk about something that I'm going to ask you to make a shift in your thinking if it applies to you. I think it pretty much is going to hit all of us, but I'm going to ask you to make a shift in your thinking, and I will let you know when that shift comes in the message. But for now, Victory Lap. Our series Victory Lap, we said that when we talk about victory, there's at least 3 things about victory that we wanted to cover. Those things were these. If you turn your attention to the screen, you will see them. Victory has a position, victory has a mindset, and victory has a sound. Now, our discussion on the position of victory, that discussion is complete. We said that our position is the winner's circle, and we get in that position by accepting Jesus. You and I don't have to work our fingers to the bone to get in that position. Christ has already done the work for us. You and I don't have to run some race for our salvation. Jesus has already run the race. You like I put that bell in there, heard that ding 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 ding. Like I say, you know what? It's not that complicated. We don't get twisted by stuff like that. But when it comes to us standing in the winner's circle, family, we don't have to run some race for our salvation. Jesus has already run the race. He's won. He's taken the victory lap. The only thing we have to do to secure our position in the winner's circle is simply accept Jesus. You and I standing in the winner's circle, that's something very easy to receive as a message. It's easy to receive as a message because it makes so much sense. The winner's circle is the place where the victor stands. And Jesus has won the victory. The Bible tells us that once we accept Jesus, that Jesus doesn't just surround us because we're hid in him, but he also, his very essence fills us. So what does that mean? Well, that means, quite frankly, that once I accept Jesus, since I'm hid in him, I'm hid in victory. Once Jesus fills me, guess what? I'm filled with victory. Knowing that the winner's circle is the only place I can stand, because now I've earned the right through Christ to stand in the same place Jesus stands, and where Jesus stands is the winner's circle. Then we shifted to mindset. We said that in your mindset as a victorious person, you need to keep 2 statements on lock. The first statement was, you're a winner. And the second statement was, there's a winner in you. To kind of give context to those statements, we went to Judges chapter 6. Go there for me. Swipe your screen, get your Bibles on verse 15 in the Message Bible. In verse 15, Gideon is talking to God, and he's telling God why he cannot carry out what God is asking him to do. And in verse 16, God is going to share with him, yeah, I think you can. And here's why. If we look at Judges 6, Message Bible, starting in verse 15, Gideon said to him, meaning talking to God, me, my master, how and with what could I ever save Israel? Look at me. My clan's the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the run of the litter. God said to him, I'll be with you. Believe me, you'll defeat Midian as one man. God told Gideon that you will be able to defeat your enemy, and he said it with the power of 4 little words. I'll be with you. Now today we're going to pick back up right there with Gideon, because I believe the life of Gideon in chapter 6 and chapter 7 has a lot that it can still add to our Victory Lap series. We're going to talk about something, though, that's a topic that most people tend to avoid. They tend to avoid because they feel the topic is negative. Me personally, I don't think the topic is negative. I personally think it's encouraging. And I hope by the end of what we're doing here today, you also feel that it's encouraging. And that topic is fear. Say fear. 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 If you look at verse 16, we have been focusing on those words here. It said, God said to him, and we focused on God saying, I'll be with you. Today, we're going to add 2 more words to that statement. And if you look up here, the 2 words we're going to add are the 2 words that follow you. I'll be with you. And God says what? Believe me. Gideon, I'm going to be with you. Believe me. God says to Gideon that I'm going to be with you and I want you to believe me. And family, that seems simple enough. All Gideon has to do is believe. But what we're going to notice soon is that Gideon is going to struggle with his belief. And he's going to struggle with his belief for reasons we all can understand. If we were all true with each other, we would all be able to say that believing God at times is easier said than done, especially when fear creeps into the picture. If we were truthful, if we were to put down all of our religious speak, you and me in a room, nobody else listening, so to speak, and I ask you, is it hard to believe God sometimes? If you weren't blowing smoke at me, odds are very high that you would tell me, oh yeah, it's hard to believe God sometimes, especially, family, when fear creeps into the picture. When you have fear staring you in the face, I am not telling you that that's an excuse not to believe. I'm just telling you that's a fact. It's just a statement of fact. Whenever you're faced with fear, sometimes the belief that you felt so strong about before the fear showed up, you could find that thing being caught into a struggle. Frankly, fear can be a stumbling block. That's why it's a topic we got to address. Fear. When I think of fear, I can tell you that the seed of fear can come from many places and that it's a huge demotivator. In the case of Gideon, Gideon is a person with low self-esteem. And that is the worst of scenarios. It's the worst of scenarios because such a person, that person will generate their own fear. A person with low self-esteem, a person with low self-worth, a person with a low self-perception will give birth to fear. And that fear that they give birth to is a stumbling block beyond words. They give birth to something that works as a self-fulfilling prophecy of their own defeat. If you're not careful, fear can even keep you from doing God's will for your life. Fear can be the very thing that even though you know what God has called you to do, fear will stop you in your tracks. Look at Judges 6 and go back to verse 15. That fear thing will get you to call yourself a loser before you even begin what you're going to do. Judges 6:15, Gideon says, the Bible says, Gideon said to him, my master, how and with what could I ever save Israel? Look at me. My clan's the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the run of the litter. Now, if you recall verse 12, the angel of God showed up and called Gideon a mighty warrior. But here, Gideon is not displaying anything that closely resembles any crumb associated with being a mighty warrior. Verse 15 here, I want you to focus on these three words. Where Gideon says, look at me. I want you to know that's not just words there. When Gideon is saying that, you have to take some time to perceive the tone at which he's saying those words. He's not just saying, look at me. He's saying it more like, look at me. He's saying it more like, come on. Look at me. You call me a mighty warrior? Come on. You don't see where I come from? You don't see what I'm working with? I can't be a mighty warrior. I have the weakest family in the bunch. And you know what? Of that family, I'm the weakest of them. Look at me. Mighty warrior? Can't be. You must be talking to the wrong guy. Gideon has concluded that he is a loser. He's concluded something about himself. He concludes before he even gets started that he's a loser, and that label of loser generates fear. It paralyzes him. It stops him in his tracks before he even gets started. Let me ask you, has that ever been you? Has it ever been you? Have you ever been in a situation like that where you've labeled yourself defeated before you even got started? Have you ever concluded something about yourself based on a low self-perception that has put you in the losers column before the first minute of the match ever began? I believe many of us have done the same thing. Let me give it to you. You have an opportunity staring you in the face, but here comes your self-talk. Look at me. I'm not smart enough. Look at me. I'm not rich enough. Look at me. I'm not educated enough. Look at me. I'm not pretty enough. Look at me. What are you doing? You're labeling yourself loser before you even get started. And it is not necessarily something that you say out loud. As a matter of fact, I believe that most of us, definitely myself included, we don't say it out loud, but we sure enough think it. And just because you don't say it out loud, if you are rehearsing it in your head, you are still saying it to yourself. And in the process of saying it to yourself, that negative self-talk is writing on the tables of your heart a label. And that label is loser. You are putting in your life a self-fulfilling prophecy of defeat. And it's all generated by fear. You're calling yourself something that God has not called you. God looked at Gideon and he says, mighty man of valor. He says, mighty warrior. Gideon says, look at me. We do the same thing. But like we told you last week, it's a good thing for you. It's a good thing for me. And it's a good thing for Gideon that God often sends a winner in loser's clothing. It's a good thing, family, that God often takes the lowest of the low to do the best of his work. But as it relates to us, we need to be aware that sometimes, even though we don't release the words from our own mouth, that self-defeating self-talk is writing on the tables of our hearts something completely opposite than what God calls us. Gideon is telling God, look at me. When the truth of the matter is you and I already know God been looking at Gideon all the time. This isn't the first time God saw Gideon. Gideon didn't sneak up on the planet and surprise God. If God were to answer those 3 words directly, where he says, look at me, God would tell him, boy, I've been looking at you the whole time. I know where you come from. I know what you're working with. I know what you look like. I know you, Gideon. I saw you when you were hiding in the wine press. I saw you when you were talking down about yourself. Boy, I saw you. I know everything about you, and I still call you a mighty warrior. God says the same thing about us. God says, I know where you come from. I know who you are. I know what you're working with. I know how many resources you have. I know your education level. I know your background. I know you got a past, and some of that past have left you with scars, some of which are still healing. I know everything about you. But let me tell you something else. Even though I know everything about you, I still think there is something about you that is wonderful. Although you may have bumps, you may have bruises, you may have scratches, you may have scrapes, you may have a low self-esteem, I still look at you and I see something wonderful. Gideon says to God, look at me. And God says back to Gideon, son, I still call you a mighty warrior. How can God still call a man a mighty warrior who has such a low picture of his own self? Because God is not looking at Gideon through Gideon's own abilities. God is looking at Gideon and telling Gideon, I'm not looking at you based on you. But Gideon, I'm looking at who you can be and what you can be and what you can do with me. I'm not looking at you, Gideon, through the lens of Gideon. I'm looking at you through the lens of El Shaddai. God is speaking words to Gideon and hoping that Gideon finds some comfort in just getting off his duff and going ahead and doing what God is asking him to do. However, Gideon is going to ask God something in verse 17, though. God's doing the work. But Gideon slips in a request in verse 17. And it is on this request that we begin to make our shift, that shift that I want us to make today. Starting back here, actually verses 16 leading into 17, starting in 16 Message Bible, God said to him, I'll be with you, believe me. You'll defeat Midian as one man. Gideon said, if you're serious about this, do me a favor. God, if you're serious about what you want a brother to do, I'm going to ask you for something. Do me a solid, do me a little favor, Lord. Giving is how you asking this big thing of me, Lord. Gideon said, if you're serious about this, do me a favor. Give me a sign to back up what you're telling me. Gideon says, okay, God, I got you. You want me to do this, and you want me to believe that you're with me? Okay, I believe that you're with me, but give me a sign first. Gideon asked for a sign, family. That's fear talking. The truth of the matter is Gideon is uncertain. The truth of the matter is Gideon is unsure. Gideon wants to believe that God is with him, but at the same time, he's asking God, give me a sign. Gideon only asks for a sign if he's unsure. Verse 17, right there in Gideon, that's fear talking. Now in verses 17, all the way through verse 40, Gideon is going to ask God for signs. At different times, though, but he's going to ask God for signs. And God's going to give 3 signs. We're going to look at them really quick. Now, we've already read verse 17, and verse 17 is the preface for the first sign. Just to give you a quick synopsis, what happens is Gideon runs and gets some food items. He gets his food items and he comes back and he puts them on a rock. Verse 21, see what happens. The angel of God stretched out the tip of the stick he was holding and touched the meat and bread. Fire broke out of the rock and burned up the meat and bread while the angel of God slipped away out of sight. So that was something miraculous. Fire out of a rock, consumed. That's one sign for you, Gideon, that there is a miraculous power on your side. The second sign, go down to verse 36. In the second and third sign, Gideon is going to have a cloth. And in one sign, he's going to say, all right, God, I want to leave this cloth outside. And in the morning, I want the cloth to be wet, but the ground to be dry. The next one, he says, now I want the cloth to be dry and the ground to be wet. Now check him out. Verse 36, Gideon said to God, if this is right, if you're using me to save Israel as you said, then look, I'm placing a fleece of wood on the threshing floor. If dew is on the fleece only, but the floor is dry, then I know that you will use me to save Israel as you said. That's what happened. When he got up early the next morning, he wrung out the fleece, enough dew to fill a bowl with water. Now, you think that would be good enough? No, my man, like, hey, let's flip that script. Maybe that was an accident. That was already miraculous. But he wants to be doubly sure. That's fear keeping him in his spot. But let's look, verse 39. Then Gideon said to God, don't be impatient with me, but let me say one more thing. I want to try another time with the fleece. But this time, let the fleece stay dry while the dew drenches the ground. God made it happen that very night. Only the fleece was dry while the ground was wet with dew. Gideon asked God for sign after sign after sign. And that is an indication that Gideon was still battling with fear. Even though God said, I'm going to be with you, God said, you got to believe me. Gideon said, I believe you. That boy said, show me a sign. That means he was still battling his fear. Now, let's bring us in the picture. Has that ever been you? Has that ever been you? I can tell you it's been me. Have you ever asked God to give you a sign, to show you something that God lets me know that this is undeniably you? If you've ever done that, that's fear talking. And let's face it, sometimes, guys, we think that Gideon asked for something kind of crazy, but we can ask for some crazy things. Lord, if you want me to take this job, let the person that offered me the job be from Michigan. You only laugh because it's true. What about this one? God, if he's the one for me, let his favorite fruit be mango. God, if she's the one, when she get out of the car, let her hair be in a ponytail. I mean, what we do is we ask God for any scrap of evidence. God, if it's you, do something to let me know that this is undeniably you. Gideon asked God for sign after sign after sign. And each time, God responded with a sign. Even though God responded, our friend Gideon still had a challenge fighting back fear. Now here comes the shift. Look at your neighbor and say, here comes the shift. Believer, it is okay to be afraid. Family, it's okay to be afraid. And I know that statement is going to hit some spirits a little odd, especially if you've been deep in religion. But I'm going to tell you right now, it is okay to be afraid. I want you to repeat something with me, because I know that that thing can hit your spirits a little weird. But what I hope is by the time you walk out of here, that statement becomes your liberator. I want you to know without a shadow of a doubt when you leave my presence today that it is okay for you to experience fear. Repeat this with me. Fear does not equal faithless. Family, fear does not equal faithless. It does not. And I know that can be a hard nugget to chew, especially in some Christian circles. Especially since we as quote-unquote believers are so used to hearing those well-quoted words that Paul told Timothy. that, boy, God has not given you a spirit of fear. As a matter of fact, let's read that. Look quickly at 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. We're going to just take it out of the good old-fashioned King James. It reads, we can read it together. Ready, read. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. God has not given you, believer, the spirit of fear. Fear should not be anywhere in your life, son. Young lady, you should not be fearing because God has not given you the spirit of fear. My brother, what is this talk about you being afraid? God has not given us the spirit of fear. Well, let me tell you one thing, family. Here, what Paul is talking to Timothy about, he's instructing him to be bold in his ministry. Paul is instructing Timothy that, Timothy, I don't want you to let people and events to cause you to get timid and shy away from the call of God in your life. So what I am telling you is that if a feeling, I'm talking fear, if fear is in you and that fear is the thing that's trying to get you from to stop doing what God has called you to do, then I'm telling you that you and I should recognize that that's not God giving us that feeling. Because no, God does not going to give us anything like that because the God in us is bold. Therefore, anything that comes to move us off of what we should be doing for him, that didn't come from him. I believe wholeheartedly, for the record, that no, God has not given us the spirit of fear. And I stand behind that verse. I am not stating in any way that God has in any way given any of us the spirit of fear. But now let me tell you. God has not given us the spirit of fear, but that verse of scripture does not also imply that God has given us the spirit of stupid. Just because God has not given us the spirit of fear does not mean he's given you the spirit of stupid. It also doesn't mean that God has given you the spirit of the foolish. It's like the ridiculous example of you standing in the middle of a street and you see a loose pit bull that you don't know 100 yards started charging you, and you're sitting there going, God has not given me the spirit of fear. God has not given me the spirit of fear. God has not given me the spirit of fear. Well, you know what? You can keep quoting that, but I hope God is giving you hospital money because you should be getting out of the way. God has not given us the spirit of fear, but my God has also not given me the spirit of stupid either. There are things in your life sometimes that just make you afraid. Therefore, we shouldn't take that overboard. Loved ones, fear is a feeling. It's a feeling. Like happiness, it's a feeling. Like experiencing sadness, it's a feeling. God has not given us the spirit of fear, but he has sure enough given us feelings through which we can fear. Fear is a feeling, and sometimes that feeling is quite valid. I'm going to share with you a personal family example. Now, it's in my family. It's not the Greta and I family, but it's in my family. I have a person in my family who I love beyond words. And that person went through a relational ordeal. That person went through a relational ordeal. The person is a female, and she had been married for decades. Now, during that time, she had a few jobs. She did a couple of things here and there. But what her primary role was, the primary task that she took on, was the task, or the role, I guess, of being wife and mom. In doing so, now I'm going to tell you, first of all, right or wrong. In doing so, though, right or wrong, she neither finished her college education, nor did she pursue any other things on her personal interest list, because her life was dedicated fully to the role that she embraced. Keep in mind that, once again, she had been married for decades. She embraced that role, and then one day she finds herself divorced. And it was not of her own choosing. She found herself divorced, and then I had an opportunity shortly thereafter. The ordeal began to speak with her face to face. And I told her, I said, "You're going to be okay." She's a believer, so I even rolled out the red carpet and told her, "And remember, God has not given us the spirit of fear." But I also acknowledged that she was afraid. And I told her, that's fine too. Think about what position she's in. Think about her scenario for a minute. In her scenario, one day her life is complete, at least from her view. Then months later, everything that she knew to make her life complete was gone. And there she stood with nothing to fall back on. She didn't finish her education because she was busy being wife. She didn't start any business that she's always wanted to start because she was, right or wrong, being mom. She didn't make any plans to be by herself because in her mind she would never have fathomed that she would be alone, not this way. She is facing a new life because everything has changed. And family, she's facing that new life right now. She's facing a life she has to deal with right now. This is what she's facing. Effectively, I want you to imagine that where she is she's standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and she knows that she has to take a step. How dare I tell her not to be afraid? How dare I tell her not to fear? How dare I not empathize with what she's getting ready to go through? How dare I not show some compassion for what her feelings are having her go through right now? How dare I not acknowledge her fear? There she is, toes hanging off the edge of the Grand Canyon, knowing that she has to take a step. Nothing to stand on, nothing to fall back on. Just her in the position this life has put her in. I remember looking at her and telling her, "I know that you're afraid, but sweetheart, Let's move forward. And I want you to know that Greta and I will be with you. That's the same way God's been talking to Gideon. And that's the same way God talks to us. Regardless of what life has given you as something to focus on that you should fear, I want you to know that I'll be with you. I understand that you're afraid, but I'll be with you. I understand you're dealing with fears, but I'll be with you. In the book of Judges, family, Gideon had a challenge fighting back his fears. The beautiful thing about it, though, why I like this story so much, is even though Gideon had fears, Gideon made the decision to move forward in what God asked him to do. Gideon moved forward in the face of his fears. That is essential in the mindset of a person who calls themselves victorious. Say this with me. I might be afraid, but I'm not going to let fear have rule over me. I will not allow fear to override my faith in God. It's not the fear. It's whether or not you allow the fear to override your faith in God. Many times you can gain the victory by just not stopping. Many times victory is yours if you just, get this, carry your fear across the finish line. If you won't let me go, then I'm going to take you with me to what God has for me in this life. Because I believe my God is with me. There are times in your life that if you just keep your feet moving and keep your eyes on the prize, you will get your victory. Plus, everybody say plus. Plus, family, look, you and me being afraid, that ain't surprising God. You and I making the assumption that fear that we're having and experiencing surprises God. It's like you and I going into the corporate office of a car manufacturer and saying, hey, do y'all know y'all car got headlights? Yeah, it sounds funny, don't it? Hey, do y'all know y'all car got headlights? And they go, no, really? And you're like, uh-huh. And it's got Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. They go, shut your mouth. We didn't know that. You're like, uh-huh. They're like, well, thanks, buddy. Thanks for letting me know. We had no idea. As comical as that sounds, you and I believe in that God doesn't know that this body, this person, this human that he made can experience fear is just as crazy. Nobody knows their creation better than the manufacturer. So you and I experiencing fear is no surprise to our Creator. It's not the fear. It's whether or not we allow that fear to keep us from moving forward in God. Go back to Judges 7. Go to Judges 7, chapter 7. Gideon keeps moving forward, family. And we celebrate Gideon for that. He keeps moving forward, and in chapter 7, he is on his way to battle. And God is getting ready, while he's on his way to battle, to trim down what Gideon has And what Gideon has is 30,000 men, 30,000 soldiers. God is getting ready to trim that down to 300. And now God trimming that down to 300, you may think that's no big deal. But if you were to tiptoe into chapter 8, you will learn that Midian has over 135,000 soldiers. Now, if we were real, just that difference in head count alone, you can see how Gideon would have some real reason for concern. Look at Judges chapter 7, verse 2. I want you to notice how God trims this down. Verse 2, God said to Gideon, you have too large of an army with you. I can't turn Midian over to them like this. They'll take all the credit, saying I did it all myself, and forget about me. Make a public announcement. Anyone afraid, anyone who has any qualms at all, may leave Mount Gilead now and go home. 22 companies headed home. Now 22 companies, that's 1,000, so 22,000 left. 10 companies or 10,000 were left after that 20,000 just went home. Verse 4, God said to Gideon, there are still too many. Take them down to the stream and I'll make the final cut. When I say, this one with you, he'll go. When I say, this one doesn't go, he won't go. So Gideon took the troops down to the stream, 300 meaning 300 men, lapped with their tongues from the cusp of their hands. So they got water like this and just kind of like, scooped it up and drank it. All the rest knelt to drink, so actually lapped like a dog would lap. God said to Gideon, I'll use the 300 men who lapped at the stream to save you and give Midian into your hands. All the rest may go home. Now, in chapter 7, even though Gideon is moving forward, I'm going to show you that Gideon was still afraid. Look at verse 9. Verse 9 says, that night God told Gideon, get up and go down to the camp. I've given it to you. If you have any doubts about going down, go down with Purah, your armor bearer. When you hear what they're saying, you will be confident, you will be bold and confident. And his armor bearer, Purah, went down near the place where the sentries were posted. If you would, sir, give me that same verse in the NIV Bible. Now, in the Message Bible, in verse 10, God tells him, if you have any doubts, I want you to go down with your armor bearer. The NIV Bible makes it a little bit clearer. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp of your enemy. If you are afraid to attack, I want you to go down. Notice this. God said to Gideon, if you are afraid to go down, and if you actually read further, Gideon actually goes down. If God told you to go down if you were afraid, and you actually go down, then what? You were afraid. Because you don't go down if you're not afraid. So here is Gideon going through this whole ordeal with God, all the other signs that God has given him, and he's still afraid. What is he still afraid of? All the self-fulfilling prophecies. I'm the weakest of my family, and my family is the weakest of the clan. God, I had 30,000, and you done trimmed this thing down to 300. I'm afraid. God, they got 135,000 over there, and you're sending me with 300. I know you told me to believe you that we gonna win, but I fear inside of me that we might lose. Gideon is still struggling with his fears. Gideon is still struggling, but the beauty of it, family, is that Gideon keeps moving forward. And in moving forward, he gets the victory just like God said that he would. And that's the message I'm trying to leave with you today. It is not any strange thing that you might experience fear. But in experiencing fear, we should not allow that fear to keep us from moving forward. Because our undying belief should be that God is with us. We must not allow fear to paralyze us and block us from moving forward. But you tell me, hold up, Pastor. Excuse me, sir. I noticed that God, every time Gideon asked for a sign, God responded. What happens if you ask God for a sign and he don't respond? That's a little something that you overlooked there, Reverend. And that's a valid thought, family. And I didn't overlook it. It's just that there is no formula to it. There's no formula to it, but I tell you one thing, there are two things that we can glean from Gideon's life here in chapter 7 that can give us some insight into how God works when it comes to giving us a sign. Two things. Number one, I want you to take these home with you. God trimmed Gideon's men down from 30,000 to 300. We all agree with that? God trimmed them down from 30,000 to 300. That looked like a negative event, but that was God. Sometimes the sign is there, loved ones, but we overlook it or ignore it or flat out refuse that it's God because it appears to be a negative event. Because the circumstance does not appear to be in our favor, we overlook it or flat out just deny that can't be God. That can't be. She left me. That can't be God. Yeah, she left you. But if we were truthful about it, there were things about her that weren't good for you anyway. Yeah, he left you. But if we were truthful about it, there's things about him that weren't good for you anyway. Yeah, those people don't want to associate with you no more. But if we were truthful about it, there are things about those people that were not good for you anyway. Yeah, that job let you go. But if we were truthful about it, there were things about that job that were not good or healthy for you anyway. The events appear to be negative, but not so fast. The very events, the very circumstances, the very happenings that we view as negative could very well be God at work. So don't be so quick to look at something that you view as a negative to not be a sign from God. What's the second thing? God trimmed Gideon's army down while Gideon was on his way to battle. As a matter of fact, Gideon received his final sign or confirmation that he would receive victory. He received that final sign inside the enemy's camp. What am I saying? We want God to give us a sign while we're sitting on the couch. We want God to give us a sign way before we go. We want God to give us a sign before the situation gets sticky. We want God to give us a sign before it all gets too complicated. We want God to give us a sign way in advance. Well, you know what? It would be great if every time we had something come across our life that we would be able to get a sign that's undeniably God way early, but life don't happen that way. it doesn't happen that way. A lot of times, God will give you the sign that you're seeking while you're actively pursuing his purpose, not while you're on the couch. Thinking through those two pieces of insight, I will also add in there, of course, there are times where outside of what God has put in your heart, that's the only sign you're going to get. That's a reality too. I will tell you that in my experiences, though, as I'm going through what God has for me, that God has always seemed to put some little nuggets of encouragement along the way. And you could consider those nuggets of encouragement a sign from him. Family, here's the bottom line. The whole point is that we should move forward and not allow our fear to override our faith. There's a misperception that victors are always 100% certain. But that's not true. People are not always 100% certain all the time. If we were putting it in the context of Gideon, a warrior is not 100% certain all the time. If anybody told you that, they lied. That being said, I want to leave you with these words, and I want you to keep them in your mind, and I want them to marinate in your spirit, because I want them to become something that helps you build that winner's heart. Say this with me. Warriors are not 100% certain. But for certain, quitters never get the victory. Family, it's certain that winners, they're not always 100% certain. Every move they make, they're not 100% certain. But you can also put a check mark by another certainty, and that is that quitters never get the victory. So when I tell you that we need to continue to move forward in God, that's what we need to do. Indeed, fears may come, but those fears does not equal you are faithless. So today we serve notice on the devil, and we serve notice on yourself, that we are no longer going to allow our fears to be the basis for which we stop pursuing what God has called us to do. We will not bury ourselves in religion such that whenever we have fear, that we get into some kind of self-condemnation because God has not given us the spirit of fear. God knows exactly who you are. He knows exactly what he created. He knows that fear is a part of this life, and he is not dinging you negatively for it. The important thing is not to allow that fear to cause you to be stuck in a place instead of pursuing what God has for you to do. We are a victorious people. We are a victorious people. That means that we are not people who draw back from God. Our direction in and with God is one direction. What is that direction, family? Forward. That's right, forward. Fear comes to hinder us from doing that, but no longer. Hello, fear, we know your name. Hello, fear, we see your face. Hello, fear, we know how you operate. Hello, fear, never again will you be the anchor that keeps me from pursuing what God has for me to do. We are a victorious people, and our only direction is forward in God. Love you so much. Let's pray.
We pray that today's message was a blessing to you. If you would like to help us further expand the vision, simply text the word GIVE-RTM to the number 41444 or visit us online at www.revealingtruth.org. Now remember, Jesus loves you.